2, and you'll see the PowerPoint as we walk through it a little bit, and everybody's going to kind of jump in off and on, so you can kind of stay with us where we're at on this. But before I go any further, what I would like to get from you as an audience is actually, if you can describe it to me in one word, what criminal justice means to you. Jake?
Accountability.
Credibility?
Accountability.
Accountability, okay. Yeah. Protection. Protection, okay, that's good. I see the hand over here. Yes.
Rehabilitation.
Rehabilitation, okay, rehab, okay, that's good. What else? You see, and what you would like to have in a criminal justice community.
Fairness.
Yes. Fairness.
Or justice.
Justice, good, big one. Couple more that you think are important to you.
I'm going to say equal justice.
What is it?
Like, you know, equal justice.
Balance? Since that's what, okay. You know how many times I used to get in trouble for putting a double L in there? So, I learned the hard way. That's all I always got it. It's one of those 5th grade things, you know, you always come back on it. Anything else?
Punishment.
What?
Punishment.
Punishment, okay. What? That's about yes.
Community education. So
Okay.
the community members know what it is.
Okay, so education, you're thinking, okay. Are you thinking education for the offender as well as the community?
Primarily the community to know what is available, what exists.
Okay. Okay. Chris?
Safety.
Safety, ooh, big one. Okay. Okay, a couple more. Good, you're hitting on some good points. Yes.
Communication between the system and the victims.
Okay, so you're folks thinking, I mean, really, the victims need to get in the.
Well, I had a positive experience here in Albany, but I've heard that other places, other times, people are just left in the lurch. They have no clue what's going on.
Okay, that's good. One more. Bill?
Deterrence.
Deterrent, okay. It's an E, isn't it? There we go. Okay. So now, you have thrown out some pretty good words out of it. What we want to do is try to kind of visit with this tonight now and use some of what you just shared with us. There's a couple things that you need to know as we move forward. Revenue's not coming in like what has been what had been planned for this session. It's actually the forecast as it comes in on a quarterly basis is always heading down. I mean, certainly most of you talk to them about that just a tiny bit. But what happens as a result of that, you have folks that work hard then up there, especially in Ways and Means and legislative fiscal, where else can we go to save dollars? One of the ways you save dollars actually, almost kind of like the last frontier, so to speak, happens to be the criminal justice system. Now, okay, so I'll stop there, and I'm going to explain a little bit more what I mean by the criminal justice system. Can you all see that okay? Okay. So really, when you look at the criminal justice community, it really plugs in a lot of folks. You talk about law enforcement, that's your chiefs in their cities, the sheriff in their offices, as well as the state police. Then you move into the district attorneys. Courts are huge. You know, you don't think so much that way, but I got to tell you, the deeper I've been involved in this whole system, and I know that Judge Murphy's going to address this a little bit from his view, it has serious impact, not just from the criminal perspective, but from the civil side. We want to address that a little bit with you. Public defenders is huge. Generally, I mean, back in the old days when I used to be in law enforcement, I never thought that. But the deeper I've gotten involved in that, they clearly are part of the system. Business community is. Oregon Youth Authority, OYA, and the local juvenile. Community corrections, mental health, Department of Corrections, DOC, victims and advocates. So, and that kind of catches the whole scheme of the folks that are in the criminal justice community. So from that point now, you've got that picture of where we're at as a family, so to speak. We're always wanting to work toward providing the very best safety for you. And that's why now I've asked some of these folks to come and share tonight. So Jason,
Right here.
and John, if you guys want to take from here then, for your next PowerPoint.
Okay, here. I sent this PowerPoint to Representative Olson. Let's see. And I gave him complete editorial privileges, so I don't know what's going to be on this. We'll see. This is and John, just interrupt me whenever you want. This is a PowerPoint that the DA's Association made to remind us of some kind of bedrock principles that we're interested in the criminal justice system, which is a very broad system with a lot of players in it.
And if I can jump in just for a second on that one, is that, you know, oftentimes we get issues that become very political. You have one side that wants A and you have one side that wants B. The reality is that when it comes to our own personal safety, that shouldn't be a political issue. In other words, it's a value that we all have as a society from the time that, you know, we had to walk in the wilderness and make a circle around a campfire to modern times. And so the fundamental question, why do we have a criminal justice system? Because there are victims of crime. If we didn't have victims of crime, we wouldn't necessarily be having these discussions. But that's the reality. And oftentimes, a lot of these discussions, we wind up missing that fundamental piece. And we all heard the news today about what happened in Mississippi with the pardoning of the number of men who had murdered their wives. And when you think about how that strikes us, and you think about the values that we've set out here, it's really an important reminder to go back to the foundation as to why this system exists. And it all boils down to that, because there are and there will be victims of crime. There needs to be a system that responds to it.
Thanks, John. This is constitutional language. It's not something that John and I made up. In fact, a lot of the words here are right over there on that sheet that Andy's looking at. These are the constitutional principles that provide for how we're supposed to look at the criminal law, including punishment, protection of society, responsibility, accountability, and reformation. Should we move the next slide? Which side do you want to push? Who do you trust?
Sure.
These are a number of components. Andy has addressed a lot of this to some extent. There are a lot of pieces of the pie when you think about protecting folks and keeping us safe and seeking justice, including our law enforcement folks, courts. a small editorial comment. In order for me to do my job, I need a courtroom, and I need a judge, and I need a bad. If I don't have a judge available to me, there are judges in the room, don't think like I'm manipulating you or anything, but I cannot do my work unless I've got a judge available to me. I need a courtroom in order to take people to trial, get them sentenced, process them through. We could probably spend a whole day talking about what happens with kids, but I'm not an expert on that, so I'll just mention it. We've talked about the rights of crime victims. In my work, I get to look people in the eye day after day who have lost children, who have had their homes burglarized, who have had their parents killed by drunk drivers and the like. So victims are very personal thing to me. I get to look them right in the eye and see the hurt that crime causes. And also, we're trying to keep most of us safe as long as we can, as best we can. John, comments?
Sure. You know, one of the points that I go back to with respect to the type of the work we do is this need to be able to have the courts available in order for us to do our work. Obviously, we need to have judges, we need to have prosecutors, we need to have defense attorneys in order to be able to make those systems work. Now, when a crime occurs, it occurs on a real individualistic basis. And so, as a society, we may have the benefit of being one of those individuals who has never had their car broken into, or who has never been the victim of identity theft. And so as a result, it's a little bit tempting sometimes to become a little bit apathetic about that and say, well, it doesn't really affect me, I live in a gated community, or whatever it might be. But the reality is that if we go back to those fundamental points of viewing ourselves as a community and the destruction and what the values are that exist there, then we go back to these issues again, once again, early childhood intervention, protecting rights of victims. And when we talk about having the courts available, there is a value to knowing that should we be a victim of a crime, that there's a system in place that is going to deal with that in a just way, that's going to offer a level of accountability and legality that matches the standards that our society demands.
This is, again, Representative Olson alluded to this, and that's between 95 and 2009, the rate of violent crime has dropped considerably. That is true nationwide, but the beauty of Oregon is ours has dropped more than almost any other state. And that, I think it's New York. New York is the only state that's had a steeper decrease in particularly violent crimes. And that is something I'm very, very grateful for.
And this happens to line up with a significant change in the law that occurred in the state of Oregon. Back in 1992, when I was working for the Linn County DA's office, I prosecuted a murder case here in Linn County that went to trial. And it was a case where a man had strangled his wife to death with his bare hands, while the two young children were asleep in the house. And under the current sentencing structure at that time, the court was only able to impose a 120-month sentence, in other words, 10 years. And that wasn't 10 years of actual time a person had to serve, but that would actually be something less than those 10 years. And that was for the intentional taking the life of another human being. That's where we were in 1992.
Uh-oh. Andy, help me.
Okay. While we're getting that adjusted, there were, under the sentencing guidelines,
One more.
there we go.
Okay, you got 5 minutes.
There were under the sentencing guidelines, right? And I should say the sentencing guidelines is a structure that kind of looks like a grid. On one side, you've got some numbers that correspond with how serious the crime is. On the other side, you have letters that correspond with the person's criminal history. And wherever a person lands, you look at where those categories meet, and that gives you your presumptive sentence. And so under the guidelines, there were some very serious crimes that had very, one might argue, weak presumptive sentences. And when those guidelines were created, like any other new systems you implement, there were perhaps considerations that had not yet taken place. And so the reaction from the voters in the state of Oregon was to respond with what we have now come to know as Measure 11. And I'm indicating a little bit ahead of these statistics here.
This slide simply represents, since the violent crime rate has gone down, this is how many bad things that haven't happened. If you've gone, just remember that line that went up and down. If you kept it going straight, this is the difference. This is how many people that have not been victims of crimes and how many crimes we haven't had because the crime rate's gone down. Any of you here are familiar with the Oregon Progress Board? It's a board for the state of Oregon that checks on our, I'll say, quality of life, if you will. And there's a whole bunch of categories. There's only 2 categories that met the goals. One of them was criminal justice, largely because crime has gone down. As far as the budget is concerned, the senator and the representative can probably talk more about this, but this gives you a little bit of a proportional idea as to where the money is going in the state. 54% to education, others, and student services. What's that say? 23%. Public safety is 17.
You want us to hang on a second? Jason, right there. Senator Morse, you want to talk at all about that? So? No? Okay. Okay.
It's just to give you a kind of a rough idea of what the pie looks like. Under the law in the state of Oregon, only 23% of felons go to prison. Most of them are handled in the community and in the local jail. John, talk whatever you want.
Okay, in order to go to prison, you have to have a sentence of at least 13 months on a felony. At least 13 months on a felony.
The prison in Oregon is for people that do really serious things. These are some numbers we accumulated from the Criminal Justice Commission. 51% of the people that are in prison, it's about 14,000 nowadays, are there because of Measure 11 crimes. There are some there for plea down. That's probably a term of art. For instance, if somebody committed an assault in the first degree, which is a Measure 11 offense, and they pled to an attempted assault in the first degree, that would be related to Measure 11, but we call it plea down. About a quarter of them there are guidelines, and about 12% are the repeat property offenders. So that's who's in prison in Oregon.
And just as a side note, under our current sentencing structure, if somebody is convicted of possessing drugs, whether it is heroin, whether it is any drug, if somebody is convicted of simply possessing a drug, so long as it's not some dealer amount, they cannot go to prison. It doesn't matter if it's their 100th conviction, and they cannot legally go to prison. They can be sentenced to a presumptive term of incarceration, which might be a couple of months. But that's all going to be served at the local jail. So a person cannot go to prison.
Yeah, people that are convicted of drug crimes are not in prison unless it's significant delivery type cases or manufacturing. This is just a little comparison factoids for you. 70% of the inmates in the Oregon prisons are there because of violent things, compared to 52% nationwide. So I think that shows that we kind of honed down on the violent folks to put them in prison. This one I found interesting because I wondered what the rate for trying cases before and after Measure 11 was. And somebody did a study, and our rate of trial for Measure 11 type cases now is just the same as it was before Measure 11, 16%. Interestingly, I read a factoid the other day. In federal court, their rate of trial is 3%. But the rate of trial for us is just the same. And finally, just to compare you to a couple of other big states, our rate of incarceration is 373 per 100,000. If you compare that It's 20, that's 20% less than California's rate and 57% less than Texas's rate. So we're not putting a lot of people in prison, but the ones we're putting in are of the violent variety. John, come. Just so that you know, these are, John, why don't you explain it?
Here we have Measure 11 crimes, and a really important thing to know here is oftentimes you hear discussions about is Measure 11 good or is Measure 11 bad? And one really important point that I'd like to capture here is that sometimes it's misleading to get into that discussion because really it would be no different than saying is the criminal code good or is it bad because it costs money. The reality is all Measure 11 does is set out minimum sentencing for these offenses. And in order to have a meaningful discussion about whether or not that sentence is something which our standards call for, we have to take a look at that and say, for instance, if you have somebody who is convicted of rape in the first degree, if you have rape of a child, for instance, the minimum sentence and the only sentence that they would get on that particular offense would be 100 months in prison, which would come out to about 8.5 years. And so when you start to look at those offenses and see what are the sentences that the person actually gets, that's an important part of the exercise rather than say, well, I hear Measure 11 is really expensive. You may come to the conclusion that those sentences are not enough, or maybe that they are too much, or maybe that there needs to be a change here or there. But the point is it's important to consider that discussion and not be tempted into throwing the baby out the bathwater.
Representative Bolton, do you want to?
Yeah, I'm just going to stop here for a moment. Well, if you guys want to relax, I'm happy to come back up. I just want to leave that there for you for a moment. You can kind of chew on that, what's going on with the Measure 11 crimes. That's one of the areas I want to talk about. But also, as I continue through this too, I was going to ask Judge Murphy to be part of this too, because you really need to have a snapshot view of what's happening in the courtroom as well. Jason mentioned a little bit if a courtroom is available. Well, that causes problems, and Judge Murphy, if you want to, come up and just share a little bit from your perspective too what's happening, because I want to get you an overall view and picture of what's happening in our criminal justice community.
All right, good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm just going to touch on a couple things because we don't have a lot of time tonight. It would be easy to talk here for a long time about all of these things. But first, I want to talk about this issue that John brought up, or not Jason brought up, about having a courtroom available. And then I'm going to talk about some of the long-range consequences if we don't have courtrooms available and kind of what we're already getting to experience. And I'm going to use Linn County as an example, but Judge Williams is here from Benton County. He could probably give you a similar scenario, and other judges from other counties could tell you a very similar thing. In 1980, the population of Linn County was 88,900 people. Today, it's about 110,000. In 1980, we had 5 judges in Linn County that covered all the cases that were brought before us. I wasn't a judge, I was a lawyer, but they were brought before the court. Today, 2012, we've got about 110,000 people, and as of February 1, we'll have 5 judges. Now, we had 6 judges. We actually had 6.5 judges, kind of a long story. But the bottom line is, for most of the last decade, we've had 6 judges. But because of the budget reductions, we're going back to 5. Plus a 23% decrease that we've actually had in the number of judges, while the case counts have gone up and everything else has gone up around us. 10 years ago, we had 46 staff people in our courts processing all this paperwork and taking care of it. And as of May 1 of this year, we'll have 29. So from 46 to 29, that's a 37% reduction in court staff. We are at the point now where one courtroom is closed every day because we don't have sufficient court staff to run that courtroom. We've got a judge sitting there, but we don't have sufficient court staff to run that courtroom. And by May 1, we are looking at the likelihood of having 2 courtrooms shut down every day. Now, you can do the math, 2 out of 5, 40% of our court capacity is going to be shut down every day. So what does that mean? Well, there's a public safety impact, and there is a business commercial impact. And they both are very relevant to the conversation. The public safety impact is we will increasingly have to ration court resources. we will only be able to hear the most serious cases. The people in custody charged with crime, serious crimes. The people whose children have been removed from them by the Department of Human Services. Things of that nature. Things that might be considered less high profile, less high priority. Things like small claims. FED, which is eviction. When people don't pay their rent. Civil disputes. And even divorce will take a back seat because there just won't be time to hear all these cases. We went through this same thing in 2003 with budget reduction. We had to then actually stop hearing certain types of cases. Now, in a constitutional democracy, I want to submit to you that that is totally unacceptable. To have a court system that can't even do just the basic work that is charged by law to do. On the public safety side of things, it gets a little complicated, but there is the criminal side. And definitely, there are some criminal cases that will be delayed, postponed, won't be heard quickly enough. And what John and Jason can tell you is that the longer that a criminal case ends, the more difficult it is for the state to achieve a successful prosecution. The more likely it is that someone who really ought to be convicted goes through. So the more that we cut back on court resources, that factor is coming. But it's not just criminal cases. One of the things we hear every morning, 8:30 every morning, is family abuse prevention orders. These are mostly women who are coming before us whose husbands, boyfriends, and others are beating them up. And in the worst case scenario, I think as John described, killing them. And one of our functions as judges is to grant restraining orders where appropriate to prevent that from continuing. We also have to deal with children being abused and neglected and protecting them in the process. And if there isn't enough court time, those cases will be delayed. And delay can mean endangerment if people aren't getting enough. Now on the commercial side, there's been a lot of talk about how friendly Oregon is to business. What we're beginning to see right now is that a very critical court function for business. Two of them. One of them is the integrity of property title. Now, you may not think about this a lot, but if you bought a home at any time in your life, you purchased something called a title insurance policy. There are already in several states in the United States title insurance companies that are refusing to issue title insurance because the courts are not docketing judgments in enough time for that insurance company to have a reliable record that they know whether or not the title they're issuing, the title insurance they're issuing is sound. That's happened in Florida, Fort Myers, Florida. We are only a little way to do that because frankly we are increasingly unable to docket liens and judgments in timely fashion. We used to have a standard that everything was docketed within 24 hours. That's gone. We right now close our records office every day at 4 p.m. By May 1, we'll be closing it at noon because there just won't be enough people to process the paper. Another area is resolving civil disputes. Whether it be a small claims dispute between two neighbors who can't, settle something, or whether it be a massive lawsuit involving large businesses. You think a big business is going to want to come to the state and invest if they can't get a day in court within a reasonable period of time to resolve their legal differences or court. So what's at stake here really is some pretty serious things for our state, both in terms of public safety and also in terms of economics. And my final word before I sit down, and I'm going to sit down before I even make this down. My final word is, I kind of liken the justice system to the criminal justice system anyway, to a milk stool. And I tell the legislature this every year when they're in session and they're considering various budget items. The milk stool is supported by 3 legs. One leg is law enforcement, and law enforcement actually has 2 parts to it. There's the part before the person is convicted, and there's the part after. Before the person is convicted, those are all the police officers. Okay? And after the person is convicted, those are all the probation officers, and corrections, and prisons, and jails, and all that. So that's one leg, law enforcement. The next leg is the district attorneys and defense attorneys, the attorneys that make the system function, that make sure that there is fairness and justice, those words that you folks grew up on that people. And the third leg is the courts, the arbitrator, the person who stands in the middle to make sure everything is fair. If you don't fund each of those 3 legs in a way that is relatively equal to the need, if you cut one and overfund another, then the entire system becomes lopsided. And we have seen this happen again and again and again. Over the 30 years that I've been watching this and working with this, one side of that military school will get a little bit of extra funding, but the other side won't, and then it becomes lopsided. Prosecutors can get all the funding in the world, but if they don't have a courtroom to hear their case, or a defense attorney to defend the defendant, they can't. The case won't go anywhere. If we don't have jails and prisons to put people in, then that compromises our ability to sentence. If we don't have programs for the mentally ill, the drug and alcohol addicted, for other people who we could deal with without putting them in prison, then the system is out of whack and it's costing us. So there has to be some balance in that approach, number one. And number two, we need to recognize that that criminal justice system is an essential function of government. It's one of those really high priority things. There are certain things, we've got to keep the governor's office open. The legislature needs to meet every year. They need to meet, they need to have enough money to keep their offices going and the paper going and everything else. And the courts, and law enforcement, and corrections have to have enough money to keep that system. And if we don't have those things, this story is going to get further and further and further.
Thanks, Judge Murphy. That's good. Yeah, Judge Murphy. Do you want to continue to share as we've been chiming in right now, or would you rather kind of hold off? Okay, come on up. Gail's going to give us a little bit of perspective then from defense attorneys, from the public defender, but it all ties in.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Gail Meyer, and I was a criminal defense lawyer for 25 years before I retired my practice. And now I'm a representative in Salem on behalf of the Criminal Defense Lawyers Association, trying to work for fair and balanced laws. And I appreciate, I just want to acknowledge you have such a wonderful representative in the community, and he is such a big and he opens up the door and he allows the voice of everyone, and that's how you get a fair health system. I think one of the topics that's at issue with the Commission on Public Safety, which Representative Wilson is a part of, is how should our system really determine the sentence that an individual should serve or be punished with? So if an individual commits X, Y, and Z crime, they're convicted of several of them, how should you go about the process of determining what that sentence should be? We kind of right now with mandatory minimum sentences, the conviction itself determines the amount of time. It's the mandatory minimum sentence. The judge can go over that amount of time, but the judge can't go below that amount of time. But the sentence is driven by the charge. What the Commission's looking at is maybe there's a smarter way, a leaner way, a better way, and that is to look at the individual and what is the risk level of that individual, what are the needs of that individual. Can we more safely address that person's needs in the community with punishment, but with treatment, rather than mandatorily sending them to prison and having them serve X amount of time? It'd be interesting to hear from the judges their perspective, but having been in the system a long time myself, I know that there's been a tremendous shift now from when judges had the ability to make those judgment calls based on the individual before them, than now when that judgment call is removed from them, and it's really determined as a matter of a block sentence. The only thing I'd like to really point out to you is the criminal justice system is a system comprised completely of human beings. And there's nothing mathematical about it. There's nothing mechanical about it. It's human beings, from A to Z. All of us have our frailties. All of us have our foibles, our weaknesses, our preconceived notions, our blind spots, whatever. And so really the question is, should there be checks and balances and multiple players in determining perhaps the rightful outcome rather than a one-size-fits-all predetermined result? What we do know about Measure 11, 70% of the people who are charged with Measure 11 crimes are first-time offenders. They've had no prior criminal. So, yes, it is reserved for the worst of the worst crimes, but when you look at it individually, misdemeanors, and you charge a misdemeanor, much more of a public safety risk than a first-time felon, perhaps, who's charged in some of these instances. So the real question and the real work is, how should we figure out what kind of sentence somebody should serve? Who should make that decision? Should it be born more based on the risk level of the individual and the needs that they have, as opposed to a predetermined set time frame based on the charge itself? So that's some of the work that Representative Olson's are taking. And again, I just want to let you know, we have a wonderful representative in your building. Because he's
Thanks, Gail. Everybody know. Okay, I'm going to get you involved here for a few minutes, and then we're going to move on further. We're going to ask Corey and Rick to come on up a little bit here and just share a little bit their perspective, and then also Frank Moore, if you want to chime in too a little bit. We'll read Frank, from the mental health side on this whole thing. Show of hands. How many of you believe that when somebody commits a crime, they should do the time? Let's see. Okay, how many of you don't feel that that's the right thing to do? That there should be some other alternative? Okay. All right. So now, you've had a chance to chew on this a little bit here to identify what the Measure 11 crimes are. How many of you believe that the first degree crimes that are identified here absolutely should have a mandatory sentence, a minimum mandatory sentence? Show me a hand. Wow. How many of you don't believe that that's the case? Wow, potentially about 50-50. What? I think Jason, John, Measure 11 passed 2-to-1, didn't it? Back in '95. Okay, so we've got ourselves a little bit of a shift going on. How many? One other last question. How many of you believe that Measure 11 has been a main contributing factor to us having a safer Oregon? Show me some hands. Okay, how many of you don't believe that that's the case? Okay, we're about 50-50 in here. Okay. Okay, we're going to stop there. You've been involved.
Can I ask one question? That's what we voted on right there.
Well, okay.
There's a lot of guidelines under that isn't there with Measure 11.
Now there's a few other things. That's not totally all that you voted for in Measure 11. Or no, that's all in Measure 11, right? There's been a few other things that the legislature has done in the past that have plugged in that have been minimum mandatory, as well as, let's see, Measure 74.
For example, attempted ag murder was added by the legislature.
Okay, thank you. And then also Measure 57 that passed. Overwhelmingly, that was the property crime issue. I mean, people were getting just flat tired here in this state of having somebody break into their car 2 different times and get their hands slapped because of the way the structure was of the law, and now second time conviction, you have to do some time in the Department of Corrections. Okay, so I'll stop there, and you guys want to come up and just share a little bit what you've seen, what I think that the audience would like to know is what we were talking about a few weeks back as to how you have worked with developing the kids and also the offenders on reducing the recidivism rate and where we're going with that.
I'm Rick Berge with the Adult Control Probation. No argument for me that prisons do a great job in exacting justice and in putting people away that are really wicked and cruel. Prisons do not do a good job of changing behavior and making people safer when they get out. And 95–98% of the people that go to prison are going to come back out and be in our community. So there has to be an addition to prison. And at $1.2 billion for prison beds, we can't continue that and have a courtroom available and early childhood intervention and the things that we need to do to bring those numbers down. So, fortunately for parole and probation, there is a lot of research and practices that have been going on that are making a big difference in the efforts that we're making to change behavior. Can we make a person safe by not changing their behavior? Probably not. And so, in Linn County locally, 5 years ago, Linn County had one of the highest recidivism rates in the state. Now we're down about state average, which is below 30% for people that commit new crimes after they're on supervision. Sex offenders, since 1993, which is about 18 years, 17, 18 years, of the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of violent, serious, and not so violent, serious sex offenders, 4% have reoffended. So we're making a difference. We can make the community safer at $9 a day or $3,000 a year per offender compared to $30,000 a year if they're in prison. So we have to have courtrooms. We have to have the good things that we have going in this community. Linn County has excellent coordination between the sheriff's office and the courts and the DA's office and community corrections. If they don't have a local jail to put a person in or courtrooms, it's not going to work. So $1.2 billion, we can't continue that. There's a lot of folks in prison that we can handle safely in the community.
So I think the key to what Rick's talking about is something that the juvenile system as well as the adult system is using, which is a risk assessment. You heard that earlier, risk and needs, and trying to determine exactly who's safe and who's not safe to be in our community. And the juvenile system is a little bit different. Thankfully, we have all kinds of research these days around brain development, around how kids react differently to different interventions that are much different than adults. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, if it worked for adults, we used it in the juvenile system. And what we found through research is that those things don't always work. And actually, sometimes they make kids worse. Scared Straight is a good example of a program that everyone thought was going to be very beneficial. Research shows it's not effective with kids. Public safety, the way that we've been working on this and thinking about this, specifically with kids at detention. When we have a kid that's in our detention facility, we can extinguish pretty much any behavior that we want to, right? We can, public safety, they're safe, they're in the detention center. We want them to do certain things. They're going to school every day while they're there. We provide that to them. They're following the rules that we've set forth for them. The important piece is what Rick talked about, is that those kids are going to be back in our community. So if we haven't done anything different to change their thinking, to change their behaviors, when they're back in our community, we want them to make better decisions. And so, I would throw out there that really what we're talking about for public safety is that when an offender is back in our community, that they're making the decisions that we would want them to be making. When kids are on probation or adults are on probation, we can kind of monitor them, we can get them to do what we want them to do, whether that's through taking urine analysis to make sure they're not using drugs and alcohol. What we really want to do is, when we're not monitoring them, we want them to be making good choices. We want them not to be using drugs or alcohol to the point where it's causing problems in our community. Again, we've come miles, there's lots of research out there to look at. As we get tighter with the budget, you've heard that all night, I think that's a pretty consistent thing, that things are getting tighter with our budgets and in our community. We have to be smarter about what we're doing. And looking at research-based programs that have research behind them that says this works with offenders, that's what we want to do. We want to look at our high-risk offenders. That's who we want to be providing the highest level of service to, the highest level of supervision, the highest amount of resources, because those are the ones that are in our communities that are causing the most disruption. County juvenile departments in the state of Oregon supervise over 90% of the kids that are involved in the juvenile justice system. 90%. If you put all the juvenile department's budgets together, we're still probably not as high as Oregon Youth Authority's budget, which is dealing mainly with incarcerated youth that are in the juvenile prison system. So, putting our money in the front end, trying to change behaviors, improve decision-making for kids in our community, that's what we've been working very hard on over the last 5 to 7 years. We've been making a lot of progress. And really the testament of the juvenile system is whether or not they end up with it. And so that's what we're trying to do, is turn them around, get better decision-making going on, so they're not involved in the adult system, which again is a very costly system to be in.
Thank you, guys. Where's Frank? Frank, you want to weigh in at all from your perspective on this for the mental health side and how it plays in?
I think my approach would be including substance abuse in it. And I think that my department or our department, mental health and alcohol and drugs, our role in this process is a supportive one. And I think when you went through your list, the first word that came out was accountability. I think that that's my approach, whether it's shared by all of my peers or colleagues in the board. I'm not sure what my approach is that a person's accountable whether they're mentally ill or not, a person's accountable whether they're under the influence of drugs or not. How we deal with them within the system may change, and I think our role, and Tony, our alcohol and drug program manager, is with me, is that our role is to help sort out, who's treatable and who's not treatable. And I've done that in working with Rick at Community Corrections. We do that with the juvenile department. I think the other place that we look for issues of public safety have to do with our work with the sheriff and with the local police departments. Being able to tell, is this person under the influence, not under the influence of alcohol and drugs, but is there a major mental illness or a severe persistent mental illness there that can somehow be on the way in. We can reduce the risk factors and the risk to law enforcement and the community, and on the way out, whether it's coming out through community corrections or working with the sheriff in the jail, making sure that one, the person is not at risk to others, but also they don't place themselves at risk because of their mental illness. I think that one of the things we have done very well in Linn County is the drug court, and I think that if you've never been to one of the drug court graduations, I would strongly encourage you to do so. I believe that is about accountability, and you see that people really, I think, have turned their lives around. It's a very touching experience. Back to East with respect to mental illness, there's a small subset of the group we're talking about who are affected by a severe persistent mental illness. So we do have those people not only within our state prisons, but within community jails. We also have a psychiatric security review board system at the state level, which although I personally believe it's taken more than the sheriff gets with respect to being conservative when it comes to releasing people from the community. I think it's a good system. I know Representative Olson has been part of the task force back before the 2011 session that looked specifically at that piece of it. So again, my role is to play a supportive role in the process, and I think that's what our department does to the best of our abilities within the available resources. I think as Judge Murphy alluded to earlier, we've been going under, as the courts have been going through a series of tests for the last 2 bienniums. So what we were able to do 4 years ago is substantially reduced right now, and I think that the data in terms of recidivism and people within the criminal justice system, that significant decline toward the end is going to change if we don't come up with some way to sustain the system.
That's right. Okay, I'm just gonna go for a few more minutes here, and then I'm gonna open it up for you here. Sheriff Moore, Chief Boyd, you want to weigh in on anything at all? Your thoughts on the need for having solid laws to prevent and maintain safety for the public?
my job as police chief, which I'm very honored and blessed to have, is to keep my community safe. It's to keep you all safe, it's to keep my family safe. It's to keep everybody in the community and my officers safe in what they do and having the resources to do so. We've heard a lot of talk tonight about the way that our resources have been really hammered in the last few years. By the DA's offices, the judges, the courtrooms, law enforcement, the sheriff's office, no different. I have 5 fewer sworn officer positions today than I did when I got here 7 years ago. And the sheriff's down 11. Yeah, that long ago. We answer on average 62 to 65,000 calls a year with the Albany Police Department in this community alone. The average Albany police officers answers individually somewhere around 1,900 calls per year per officer in the city. That's in the city. So we count the sheriff's office as in the state police and everything that they cover here. When you talk about, following the statistics that we see up here, 98,000 fewer crimes have occurred because of Measure 11 and the people, the violent offenders that are in jail. 98,000, 96,000 fewer crimes that have to be investigated or has to be dealt with by the courts, by law enforcement, and by the jail. If those people that are currently in jail are out, they are going to be committing crimes. That means we're going to have somewhere in the neighborhood of 90,000 plus more victims than we currently have to deal with. And as DA Carlisle mentioned so eloquently, and it's true, is we look them in the face every single day and see what impact that has on them. We talk about the costs of the system and the programs associated with incarcerating people. In round numbers, which I have here, I think it's kind of telling, which will help us. The average cost of a state of arrested, convicted, incarcerated, supervised, and sex crime offender is $187,108. The cost to a victim of a sex crime, including out-of-pocket costs and quality of life costs, is somewhere around $212,000. Okay? For every sex crime that's reported, it's estimated that there's another 2 to 3 that go unreported. So every sex offender that we keep in jail under a Measure 11 mandatory minimum sentence means that they're not going to be creating victims and costing us much more money to the community and the individuals involved. So, those are crimes that, we talk about taking a look at these crimes. These are the most serious and the most serious. One of the things I love about this country and one of the things I love about this profession that I do is reasonable people who disagree. That's what I love about this country. But when I personally look at the crimes that are listed up here, these are the most serious. I don't care if it's your first time, I don't care if it's your second time, I don't care if it's your third time. When you commit one of those crimes up there, and if your family is victim of one of these crimes up there, you would want the person responsible to go away and be held accountable for it. And that's kind of where I come from.
Feel my best material. That's all right. Because one thing that back in the day when all this was going on, I was a young deputy working for Sheriff Barton back there. One thing that John brought up, we had pretty high crime rate, of course. You could only get certain amount of time for certain crimes. Also, there was another piece of this puzzle where we had a parole board at that time that was totally out of control. I remember as a young deputy working for Sheriff Barton, Sheriff going before the end, prisoner to the Department of Correction on 25 years for a first-degree rape, and 6 to 8 months later, I was booking that same guy back in my jail. Well, Sheriff Barton actually. For every one of these crimes, we got to keep in mind that we got real victims out there. And that's why Measure 11 was passed, not just once, but twice in the state. When it was going to be repealed, they were going to turn it over. I can't remember exactly what year that was, but again, overwhelmingly, people in this state stood up. We want violent criminals held accountable. And like Ed said, I don't care if it's first offense. If they do that, they deserve to go to prison. Like Forrest Gump says, that's all I have to say about it.
John, one point briefly is, I'm here representing Benton County. And one point I want to make that is kind of stating the obvious. North Albany is in Benton County. And why is that important when we're talking about all the issues that we're talking about here today? In Benton County, we have 3 judges. And as you heard, judges have more than just the responsibility of working with the criminal docket. But just from the DA's office's perspective, just to give you some numbers, we have an average of over 15,000 scheduled court appearances that we need to prepare for to respond to each year. That's spread out over 3 courtrooms. So it doesn't take much to consider that when you add even more to that load, what effect is that going to have? And if you start talking about closing down courtrooms and not making courtrooms available, it really presents a significant issue. The progressive programs that you hear about, those that involve treatment courts, domestic violence courts, mental health courts, family courts, those require resources in order to be able to do those. And so it's very, very important if you're going to take an entire look at the whole perspective, you take those matters into consideration, the challenges we face.
I just throw this one up here at you really quick. Jason, this is some information that you've received.
Yeah, we just asked the DOC. Most major 11 offenders are there. The minimum wasn't enough. We committed more than one major 11 offense or a major 11 offense plus another offense, and the judge said that should be consecutive.
Okay.
So more than half the major 11 offenses are consecutive sentences.
Okay, the point being though is that you're going to have the concept of returning, I mean, there is discretion to some degree. Okay, I get it. So you kind of touched on that before.
That's why we need Rick Burton, because 77% of those guys are out now. We got to have it.
Alrighty. And then I think this was the last slide here. You heard a little bit about this, and I got to tell you, I am such a huge advocate of, actually, if you could use one word, it's not on the border that we were writing on, and it's not here, but you can read in between it. It's the idea of restoration. I mean, I really do believe in restoration, but I also do believe that if a person commits a crime, there's got to be some consequence with it as well. And I don't think that there'd be any argument with any of you here, but I mean, we do believe in restoration. So one of the big things that I really appreciate the DAs and the courts have done a good job with, and just our community has done with this drug court. I remember the first time I ever heard that, what it was all about, I thought, baloney. But it has been extremely successful, and I think actually, Jason, you got, yeah, okay, this is just quick really, and we'll move on here. Examples, Harney County, what they've done with under the drug court, and the whole idea then also with mental health court is another one that gets plugged in with that. This was the one over in Lane, down in Lane County that just, I mean, every time I see this one, it excites me. I mean, to see 68 babies that were born because of drug court, they got moms on board and got them straight, going down the right path. But that was the whole system, that was the community to make it happen. And I think, so that gets back to where we were at the very beginning. How we have to depend on each other and work forward on this. I do believe, and I appreciate the 2 DAs that we have here, because we've had lengthy discussions on where we go from here. I do believe that there is some room that we should clearly take a look at where we're at as it applies, not specifically just to sentencing guidelines, not just as it applies to minimum mandatory, but also how do we develop more toward the drug courts? How do we develop and try to get our recidivism rate even lower than what it is through maybe re-entry programs to get people back out to recognize the risk factors, some type of scale of saying, gosh, you screwed up, you know, it's your first time, but let's reevaluate where you're at and who you are. Now I'm going to stop there. There's 2 pieces else I want to throw in because I know there's a number of you that are interested in this. There's 2 work groups that Gail has been involved in helping me work on too as well. I'm hoping, I've talked with Chief Justice Paul Demunis, who's the chair of our commission, about this, that I would like to tie in as we move forward in recommendations to the 2013 legislative body and movement for this. And it deals with sex offender registration. Because I got to flat tell you, there are some crimes that are sex crimes that don't make sense to me that you have to register the rest of your life. I mean, there are some that, you know, when you're 15, 16, you did a very stupid thing, but it falls under the sex abuse 1 statute. And I think that that's one of those things where, and again, I appreciate both these DAs because they get it. Is there the potential of maybe reevaluating it? That does exist. So that part bothers me. The other thing that bothers me as well is the expungement statutes. That thing needs to be revisited. Appreciate Gail again and a number of other folks. We've got folks from the DA's Association that have been involved in a work group that have had to look at where we can go. It doesn't make sense to me to have committed a crime and not be able to get rid of it, especially if your behavior has changed over 20 to 25 years. That you're not who you were when you committed something when you were 16 to 18 or a little older. Okay, I'm going to open up for questions. Senator Morris. You want to come on up and help me? What is that?
If I stand up and speak, I risk saying something stupid, but it just dawned on me the wisdom of our forefathers when they created the system of government that we have. It's called representative government. It's kind of citizen legislature that brings people from various walks of life and life experiences into that crucible to make public policy. Friends, you don't know how lucky we are to have Andy Olson with the life experience in public safety, interfacing with the criminal justice system and the courts and all the parts and pieces to move a very, very complex issue forward to hopefully some kind of resolution that will meet the needs of our community. It's a huge task. I've been sitting here just soaking it up, as have you, with the information and the complexity of this issue. Underlying this whole issue is how are we going to pay for it? That's a fundamental issue, is how will we pay for it in an economy that is not performing and declining revenue. That's a task that the February session will tackle. Most likely the next revenue forecast will be flat at best. It may be declining marginally, but we don't have the resources. We have already consumed the reserves that we had, the ending fund balance that we had kept back. We've largely consumed all of that. We do not have a cushion. So these are serious issues and they deserve serious attention. Thank you all for being willing to participate in this and lend your voice. So, Andy, thank you.
Thanks, Senator. No need now. I mean, you can say okay, let's open up for some questions then, and that's the year up. Oh, go ahead and stand up so everybody can hear you. And then maybe one of you that could help me out.
All right. With regard to that, the reason I didn't raise my hand when you were asking, you know, if your kids good or bad or whatever, is one thing. Not every crime that you had up there for Measure 11, they're not all the same degree. And so the judges, you said that the judges can go up with their sentencing or whatever, but they can't go down. Not every one is the same degree, and so, I mean, they can't go down. And so I think that's one flaw in the measure. I mean, there's, you know, there's different, like I said, different degrees of crime, and so I think that's, you know, one thing. But then the second thing is that and I think it came with Frank, what you were saying about dealing with some of the criminals that, or they commit crime, and rather than going to prison, they should be helped. Okay. You know a person, a young man, who actually is, he might be in his early 20s, he did something wrong, but, stupid, okay. But it was not ever noticed that he has total mental. He had alcohol fetus syndrome, and he is actually in prison right now. And no one caught it, but he should be helped that way. And so, you know, I don't know how the system can help that and how they can catch it. And so I just wondered if anybody knows a way or if that can still be helped, even though he's already been sentenced. And so I just wondered, because it's a measure of crime, but I don't think he even realized what he was doing. And yet, you know, there was nothing he could do. So I just wondered, you know, Frank, if you know, or if you know Andy.
Well, John, you, Jason, you know, you don't need to weigh in on that, but you heard what she was talking about for the mental health issue. You guys are always concerned and conscious of that as you move forward through that. And obviously the defense would bring a point to that as well.
Sure. The reality is that our systems are set up to be able to consider a broad range of factors, including the mental health issues, including a whole variety of defenses that are in place. That's not to say that our system is perfect. In fact, there is no system that is perfect. And the question is, what can we do with our system to make it the best system possible? And so, you know, it's difficult. It's certainly invited discussion in a one-on-one to talk about a particular case without having all of the information to be able to address that. But I can say broadly that there are already in place systems and checks and balances and presumptions of innocence and burdens of proof that are designed to be protections in that process.
Yeah, Bessie, I just had something to contact me the last couple of weeks. I have more concern too with the situation that occurred down in Josephine County.
One piece of information that I did not hear is the percentage of those incarcerated in jail and in the Department of Corrections that have a treatable mental illness. Do you know what that number is?
Right. Run us around, and I guess we have to be able to sort between what's a severe system mental illness.
Go ahead and stand up, Frank, so everybody can hear you.
I think we have to be able to sort between what's a severe system mental illness or a mental illness. If you take a look at the range of diagnoses, you can have what's called an access to diagnosis, which Rick knows as well as I do. We can spend a lot of time with it, and treatment will not be effective. We look at somebody who's schizophrenic, somebody who, say, has major depression or a bipolar disorder, which we could treat with medication. I think those are the people that we can work to treat, and I think that figure would probably be in the 7 to 12% range. The other compounding issue, however, is that we get people who have both diagnoses, and that makes it even more difficult. I think one of the issues we deal with within the community has to do with people who do criminal things, who may be schizophrenic, but also have an access to disorder, which basically renders them relatively. At that point, we become illness management, and I think at that point we become part of the organization system to keep them as much in terms of tracking and monitoring those people and keeping them managed, as you say.
Okay, sir.
Yes, my name is Reverend Sam Davido, and I think that one thing that has been addressed. Well, first of all, let me state that as a victim of an assault, like me, permanently disabled, and having worked with abused children for years and years, that I'm not sympathetic to punishment, accountability, etc. I've seen victims of abuse and crime, horrible things. However, many people have stated that there's lesser crimes, and there's one right now. I feel that it takes away judicial discretion, and Measure 11 in many cases is used as a leverage to leverage people into plea bargaining to become part of the system. My younger brother was involved in a fracas. He was assaulted. Someone else's finger was cut, not the person who assaulted him. Allegedly, he was being charged with that. Somebody's finger was cut. And this man is looking at 5 to 7 years of his life being taken away because he's being charged under Measure 11. No criminal record. He's a homeowner. He's a father. He's a good man. But that discretion and that ability for the judge to make those decisions has been taken away from us. I'm a fairly conservative guy. I don't like to see people hurt or abused. And for instance, with the sex crimes, I think they should be put away for longer. But it's unfairly applied, and it's used as a leverage to put people into plea bargains. And that needs to be looked at, and that's one thing that I don't feel has been addressed.
Okay, so really quick, what I'm hearing is that you're interested in seeing discretion returned back to the court.
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's my position also.
Okay, well, I'll say a show of hands. How many are interested in that? Okay. Okay, how many of you would just as soon keep it the way it is? Okay. All right. You're up. You're up. You're up. Stand up.
Do I have to? Well, actually, I'm Tyler Gabriel's mother, and I have quite a few things that I would like to say, and I'll try to be quick about. First of all, the senator, I believe, mentioned the constitutionality that we're based on here. The constitutionality really gives us the right to be heard before a judge. And what happens, and what I've seen happen in these cases, is that you are given the choice of you can either, perhaps, I think my son's sentence for someone getting a cut finger could be 20 years in prison, and you just mentioned it could be consecutive because he was charged with several felonies for walking home and being assaulted by 4 men from out of camp. Now, we've actually had news investigators, and I have to be very careful with what I say, do a lot of investigation because they came to us. They found out that perhaps this was an assault that was planned, that the police here do not know about that. There's a lot of things they haven't looked into. When we looked at the police records with the help of these investigators, there were officers who did exceptionally good work. There were others that we were appalled at what happened. We did not believe what happened. So in you saying it's a community that needs to be involved, there's a lady from CASA that says it's education, and the other lady with the district attorneys, I believe, said in the back, what she said really makes a lot of sense. That, and the judge right here that also said it's a financial situation and there's not enough judges. When somebody's case like my son's should have been investigated appropriately, and we're in 10 months now of just financially and emotionally devastated because it was not being looked at appropriately, and the only people that have looked at it appropriately is an investigative news reporter. Those are the things that are costing our city and our county. I love Albany, but I won't allow my autistic son to be out after dark now. I have another son that loves to walk around. He's not allowed to do that anymore. Just because I have a fear that if anything happens, it won't be handled appropriately. So in saying that, I really appreciate everyone's input, but there's a lot of money being spent on people that he even has a written letter from the Homeland Security, Department of Homeland Security. That's where we're wasting a lot of money. Right from the get-go, we're not looking at things appropriately, and we need to. Because the gentleman here that works with mental illness and things, that's where I would love the money to go to, and for the children, not cases like this.
Thank you. Okay, well, I told you I was going to try. I mean, we're only going to go to 8. We're going to be looking over minutes here, and then you're going to stay around for a little bit. Everybody else that's been involved, are you interested in seeing that? Okay, that's good. Right. I'm going to stay around for a little bit. Let's see. Yes.
I would just like to ask a question actually to the sheriff. And then noticed that you raised your hand when we were talking about discussion with judges. What would you say to the cases that have been brought up tonight, and many of out there has been affected by judges who discretion.
Well, again, feedback from this along.
Come on, so we can all hear you. You don't have that same voice when you used to yell at people.
Yeah. We went through an era back in the 80s or up through the early 1990s when no offense to any judges that might be in the room that weren't judges back in those days. And not the fact that we have a lot of problems here in Linn County where you need. But there were a lot of judges that used that discretion the wrong direction. For people that a crime was occurred, there were victims, multiple victims. That person was the due process of the law of our land, sentenced or convicted rather, and sentenced to what he should have been in prison for 25 years, and he was back out in the street in 18 months. Measure 11, when it was passed, the people in the state about what was going on, the parole board, the types of sentences that were, in the statute back then, as well as a few judges that made it bad for everybody else. And those were pretty high-profile cases. We had a fellow who was released and should have been in prison for a lot longer, went over, way over on the east side of the state, up in the northeastern part of the Countryside area, and wound up breaking into a couple's house and murdered in the middle of the night. That guy should have been in prison for the rest of his life, or at least 25 years. So that's what I say.
So I understand why it was put in place, but now that it's affecting other people in their way as well, as it's affecting people back then, why wouldn't we offer a different solution, such as maybe monitoring judges, or something that isn't as detrimental to free will?
Their ability to judge.
Yeah.
It seems to me like we should have dealt with the parole board.
Yeah,
I think that.
Okay, all right, look, something we should understand what's going on with Measure 11. Voters overwhelmingly passed that back in 95. There's a reason behind why voters have had it up to that point, for that. Is it time now to maybe review a little bit of discretion? Yeah. I'm interested in talking about that. I'll tell you that. And we have a couple of VAs here that are willing to have that discussion too, and I appreciate that. So I want you to walk away from here knowing, and I appreciate your comments on this, on some of this discussion that we're having. Okay, let's see, Fred, you had your hand.
My name's Fred Gates. Bottom line dollar is what all this is about. It's where we're spending it, where's it going to come from, everything else. And I saw a slide up there, and it was quickly taken away. I thought it said down in the corner it was $2.3 billion for the whole justice system. Is that
That's pretty close. Yeah, okay, it's just under 2.4.
Okay, $2.4 billion out of $60 billion is not 17%. It's only about 5%.
That's general fund dollars.
I'm sorry, I can talk about the whole budget, not just the general fund. Okay, next point is, somebody said $1.2 billion was being spent in the prisons. Okay, here's my point. Oregon, Washington, California, Idaho, and Nevada, and I forget the Nevada number, but Oregon spends $50,000 per person. Washington spends $46,000 per person. California spends $51,000. Idaho spends $27,000 per person, and I think Nevada was $16,000. Why are we twice as expensive as a couple of states around us that adjoin us? There's money in the bank if we could turn around and cut that down. And then we'd have room. We'd have the court. We'd have the DAs. We'd have the people that could run the court system. I quit.
Okay, just really quick here. You mentioned it was $50,000 per inmate per bed a year. $84 a day is what it, right, Rick? And that equates to $30,000 a year.
The number from DLC is just right under $82 a day, and it's about $30,000.
What is it? I have no idea what Idaho's, I think you're at about $52 a day per.
My data is only about 3 years old.
Okay, let's move on. Let's see, was there one other person? Okay, we'll get Linn here, actually, we'll finish that. Go ahead.
Okay. I and everyone I know voted for Measure 11. And I'm not kidding. My kids call me Judge Judy sometimes if I think you wrong. Okay. But having personal experience for the last 2 years with the justice system and this Measure 11, when I voted for Measure 11, I voted because I was under the impression from the propaganda I heard on TV, from what I read in the voters pamphlet prior to my ballot box, the Measure 11 was for the most heinous crimes, sex offenses primarily, heinous. I mean, horrible. I have found out since my son's been incarcerated for a DUI accident, injury accident. And I don't know who made the grid, because I've seen the grid, and I don't know where, and I don't know why the DA that he had in Marion County chose an assault 2 offense. It was not premeditated, it was an accident. You know, it could have happened whether or not he had too much to drink. Measure 11 is not being used as I voted for it to be used. It's being abused by the system. And unless we do something to change that, we can continue to see these acts on. I have the utmost sympathy. We've been victims of crime ourselves, so don't think that, you know, I'm one-sided on this, because I'm not. What I want is fair. I want justice. I don't want indulgence. I want justice. I want, I better sit down before I, discretion, yes. I want judges have power restored back to them.
Okay. See you in the back, and we got one more.
Been out of prison for 3 months. I was charged with Measure 11. Aiding and abetting. I gave the guys a ride home 3 hours after they did the crime. I did 7.5 years, but let me tell you, that was a blessing for me. It's changed my life, but I can't tell you that when you go to prison, you got to make that choice whether you're going to change or not, because that prison isn't going to do. They're going to fatten you up, they're going to give you good meals, you're going to get all these good things, but you ain't getting no treatment in the prison. You're being housed in the prison. That's all you're being needed.
What was the crime? I'm just curious.
Huh?
What was the crime?
The crime, I got charged with rob 1, burg 1, assault 2, and unauthorized use of motor vehicle.
Okay, thanks. Hey, Woody, you got the last one? And
I wasn't sure, is everything funded? Is everything funded from the state budget, or like our Judge Murphy said that some of the courtrooms are being shut down? Is that because we're not getting funding from the state, or is that a county budget issue? I don't know what works.
do you guys want to jump in a little bit? The majority of the funding comes from the state. You want to weigh in?
Our county courthouses are funded by the state, and our courtrooms are funded by the state.
Can I address that? This is a frequent confusion. The county only provides the building and the roof, and the lights, and the things that are bolted down. Everything that you can move, including people, are paid for by the state. So the court system, all the employees, the desks, the paper, that's provided by the state of Oregon.
We don't have any control over that. The state decides that.
I'm not sure what it is currently for the district attorney, but historically, the county has picked up a percentage of the district attorney's cost.
That's correct. The district attorney's office is funded by the county. The district attorney's salary comes from the state.
Okay, we got it. One more. Yes, ma'am.
If our crime is being reduced so much, how come our budget and everything keeps increasing and they can't keep the courts up? They have to reduce the courtrooms and everything if our crime has been reduced by so much. Because a few years ago, we did just fine in the courts.
Some of our colleagues in the legislature have questioned the staffing, what they call posting, management in our Department of Corrections. we are high cost compared to other states. And we're asking that question, why? Why do we have higher costs than Kansas Department of Corrections do? One of the responses that I've gotten is we do more, maybe contrary to the person who spoke previously, we do more to reduce recidivism. But I don't know, that question is being asked.
Okay, well, hey, thank you very much. You've been a pilot, so you have greatly helped out